Thanks. Good to see you. Thank you for coming all this way. I think I came longer than most of you, at least. But that's okay. As Malcolm said, I'm an associate professor in bioethics. I'm at the Faculty of Science at the University of Copenhagen, but I'm originally trained as a theologian, and I did my PhD at the Faculty of Theology as well. So I'm sort of working interdisciplinary with ethical issues around the human nature relationship. That's sort of my everyday life. And then I teach, but I think my students are a bit older than yours, but not more well-behaved, I can promise you. I'm here to speak about hope as the engine of change. And what I'll try to do is to crush all your hopes and leave you in despair. And then hopefully, if there's time, build you up again. So the last part is rather important, I think. I made some sort of plan. So I'll speak a bit about what we know and what we do. That's the crushing part. Then just a bit about the word sustainability and what it means and how it's used and how sustainability could perhaps be understood in education, or rather what are the challenges when you want to bring it into education. And then we'll end with the hope part. And there'll be a few discussions along the way where you're supposed to talk to people at the tables and you don't know them, perhaps, and it might be a personal question, so you just have to let down your guard. I mean, this is a safe space, I've been promised, so you can do that. And we begin right away, trying to see whether there could be a discrepancy here, right? What do you hope for? And this is in relation to climate change, biodiversity crisis, microplastic, PFAS in groundwater, pollution, dying out of the albatross. All these issues that we can collect under the heading of the ecological crisis, right? So what do you hope for? And what do you think that children should hope for? And is it the same? Or is there a difference where you think you are realistic and you actually hope for nothing, but you do not think you can say that to children, so they need to have a positive story? Or is it everything positive, or are you just as gloomy as me? And you have about 4 minutes to figure that one out at the table.
And I think I would like her to be a part of the solution, or working towards a solution. Yeah.
Actually, the end of this talk, if we get that far, we don't know, but if we do, is about how you can have hope while still facing up to reality and not sort of hiding facts or sort of imagining that it's much brighter than it really is. So I hope that that can be useful.
My children, that they hope for more, that it's not the same, that we're not perpetuating the same questions 30, 40 years down the line, that there will be some solutions, that they can see that we have been a custodian in change, and that they can do more. I have aspirational hopes, and I'm not entirely sure what they are, but they were better than what we have done.
Yes, and things will have actually moved in some direction.
Because if we've got the same hopes as I had, then we've not affected.
No, exactly. I think one of my favorite pictures is at some, what you call a picket, a demonstration, where an old woman is standing with a sign, and it just says, I don't know, it says, how long do I have to protest this shit? That's what you're hoping not to stand in 40 years. Okay, I'll move a bit on. And look at what we know. Last year in November the 27th, COP meeting, the International Climate Summit meeting hosted by the UN, was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres gave the opening speech where he said, "We are heading for climate hell and we still have our foot on the gas pedal." Now that's kind of gloomy, right? And the reason he said that is this figure coming from the United Nations Environmental Organization, UNEP's yearly emission gap report that shows the difference between what we ought to do and what we are doing. And then you can see the numbers here. If we are to stay within the Paris Agreement from 2015, where the global leaders decided that we should limit global warming to 1.5, max 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, to do that, this is how emissions should look. To stay below the 2 degree, this is what emissions should look like. This is what emissions are currently looking like if countries fulfill the promises they have made so far. So this is not what we're doing. This is basically what we promised to do. And what we promised to do and what we're doing is not the same. 2023 will be the year where humanity has emitted most greenhouse gases ever. Which means that the Paris Agreement, even by a conservative journal like The Economist, has been declared dead. And we are most likely hitting for somewhere between 3 to 4 degrees within the end of this century, meaning that there's a high risk we'll hit certain tipping points in the climate system that will inevitably lead to even more climate change and runs the risk of leading us into what has been called hothouse Earth, a planet where the climate will be significantly different from today for an unforeseeable future, basically. At the same time, we have a biodiversity crisis. Species are dying out at the same rate as the 5 other times the past 440 million years, where we have had what is called a mass extinction. So you probably remember, or not remember, but heard about dinosaurs leaving the planet, or not leaving it, but going extinct 65 million years ago. Big meteor, the guess is right now, hits the current area of Mexico, dust in the atmosphere, things became colder, plants died, herbivores died, carnivores died. Right now, species are going extinct at the same rate at that time. In biology, there's a very sort of dark expression called background extinction. So background extinction is part of evolution. That some species are disappearing, new appear, right? That's evolution. But the rate at which species are disappearing is 100 to 1,000 times faster than it would have been had we not entered the picture. And these are just 2 areas. Maybe you have heard of the planetary boundaries framework developed by the Resilience Center in Stockholm and now sort of broadly adopted as sort of 9 sort of ecosystem services the planet gives us that we need to protect to be able to keep the current sort of level of civilization. And the latest that came out was from a long range of researchers. I'm very sorry, you can't see this, but the main author is Catherine Richardson, who's a professor of climate change at my university, actually. And it's now estimated that 6 of these 9 ecosystem boundaries have been transgressed. So we are living in the Anthropocene, to say the least. You have heard that expression, Anthropocene, from the Greek anthropos, human, or man, actually, sometimes, but let's stay with human today, right? So Anthropocene is geologically the age we're living in now, which is where geologists claim that humans will have left traces in the geology of the planet. So when somebody starts digging down into the ground 1 million years from now, they will find layers and think, what is this? And they will say, that was humans, right? Anthropocene, the age of humans. And you can translate it into a more popular understanding by saying that for the first time in the history of the planet, one species decides the future of all other current species, humans. And you have all seen Spider-Man, so you know what you are to do when you are that powerful, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Yes. And if you're too old for Spider-Man, I have another philosopher who says the same. She's also a superhero, Pippi Longstocking. She who is very strong should be very kind. And this is what we're using our power for right now. Okay, but what are we doing about this? I think this piece of art should be hung on every government wall around the world. It's by Isaac Kodal and called Follow the Leaders. 51 years ago, the first global environmental conference was held in Stockholm by the UN, called the Stockholm Conference, where countries, all the leaders met, scientists came and told them about the ecological crisis, and they went, we have to do something. So they decided on 26 areas where they should take action. Environment, social conditions, especially poverty and hunger, and economic growth. Have you heard those before? Yes, it started there, right? I did an assessment a couple of years ago with some colleagues who actually know about this stuff from the Danish Technical University and the European Environmental Agency. And we sort of looked into these 26 points, and we could see that the ones that had to do with economic growth, things had actually improved. The ones that had to do with social conditions, poverty, hunger, and so on, some had improved, some had worsened, some had been neutral. All the ones that had to do with nature and environment, things had only become worse. 2015, we had the Sustainable Development Goals, basically just an update of the Stockholm Declaration, if you look at it, and the same way of building it up. Same thing was in the Rio Declaration from 1992. It's the same understanding that is in the Brundtland Report from 1987. It's basically the same ideas that have governed Western and thereby global environmental policy for 50 years. And the idea is that we need economic growth because economic growth will ensure that we can afford to make more social equality and improve conditions for environment and nature. That's the basic idea, right? So if you go and look at these 17 points, the most important one is number 8, decent work and economic growth, because economic growth will ensure that we can do the rest. That's the basic idea. Now, this way of thinking carries with it certain sort of presumptions. It's a way of thinking that has been labeled ecological modernization, right? And it's basically sort of an ideology. And it contains the idea that you can separate economic growth from more destruction of nature and environment. I'll leave aside social issues for today. I know it's a huge pile I'm pushing away now, but I'm trying, right? So it's sort of, it presumes that we can separate the two. You see that, right? That we can decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. Only problem is nobody has shown that that's possible, right? There is no empirical evidence showing that that can actually be done in a large scale. Nonetheless, this is still what Western environmental policy is built on today. I don't know the specifics about the latest agreements in the parliament in England, but I guess it would be based on the same, right? At least it's what everything is based on in Denmark, which is the greenest country in the world, if you ask us. A lot of people are actually rather skeptical towards this approach. I just found this one from YouGov. How is the UK government handling climate change? It seems that more than almost 50% think they're not doing or spending enough to try and reduce carbon emissions. 20% think they're doing too much, spending too much. Around 20% think they get the balance right, and surprisingly enough, around 20% have no idea, which can surprise you, but that's the way it is. Now, these questions have been asked to adults, and when you find that a majority of adults don't even themselves believe in what's going on, right, it might not be surprising that young people around the planet are becoming more and more worried extremely worried, very worried, moderately worried, right? And you can see here in different countries. I found UK, 20% of people between 16 and 25 are extremely worried, 29 are very worried, and we have 31% who are moderately worried. Then we have a small group who's just a little worried or not worried at all. So this is climate anxiety, climate depression, right? Which is not very useful for young people growing up. It's not a good start to your life as an adult to start out basically being depressed about the situation of the world because the people who came before you, the adults, who are supposed to be in some sort of control, right? I mean, that was the great thing. Can you remember that when you were a kid? That there was something called the adults? Right? I was one of those annoying kids on the playground who always said, I'll say it to the adults, right? Because for me, there was this sort of, I didn't really know who it was I was going to say it. It was just this sort of entity that was there, that was in control, right? So I could just be a kid because they were in control. More and more, our kids don't have that feeling, right? Which is very, very worrying. So we shouldn't scare them, right? I get that a lot in Denmark, right? That shut up now, you're scaring the kids. Don't go to high schools and show them this, right? You're scaring them. They should be optimistic. Yes, but why? Right? I mean, I have had parental duties towards 5 children who are now adults, and I soon learned that it was a bad idea to tell them there was a monster under the bed that would eat them if they went out of bed and came into the living room at night. Right? That was not good parenting, I understood that. It took a while, but I got it, right? So, and I think that's totally fair. You shouldn't lie to your kids and get them scared without reason. But what if there actually is a monster under the bed, right? What is then the task of the parent? Is that to lie to the child and say, no, there's no monster. No, it's nothing. I'm in control. Don't worry. Just go to sleep. I'll be in the living room. Or is it to look, say, you're right. I'll come into bed with you and we'll take our plastic swords and we'll fight off the monster together, right? What's the right way to be adult in that situation? And in my perspective, it is not to lie to children or young people about the severity of the situation. It is to show them that I know, that I take responsibility, that I care, and I need them to help me do something about it. Okay, on to sustainability. Nobody ever went on a picket with this sign, right? Everybody is sustainable these days. When have you last tried to buy something and wasn't promised that it was sustainable? Through a combination of sort of just pure bad luck and very bad decisions, I lost my winter coat last winter, so I needed a new one. And I thought, I'll be sustainable, I'll buy a used one. But problem is when you're the size of an orc, it's hard to find used clothes, right? So I said, okay, I have to buy a new one, and I thought I should buy a sustainable one. So I Googled sustainable winter coats and sort of other preferences I had about color and waterproof and warm and so on. And there was a lot of the coats, and they were all sustainable. Each and every one, which surprised me until I went in and looked, how is it sustainable? And I found out it was, with a nice word, greenwashing, with a not so nice word, pure bullshit. Right? And a good way to learn your students how to be critical is actually to tap into their fashion sense, ask them about the brands they like, that they want or have, and then go to the websites with them and look for claims of sustainability and then dismantle them together with the children, right? That's a way of learning them to be critical. But what does sustainability mean when we talk about it? And that can actually be rather difficult to figure out. This is the Brundtland definition from the book Our Common Future that was published in 1987 by a committee put down by the UN system, and they had the former Prime Minister of Norway, Gro Harlem Brundtland, as chairman, which is why it's called the Brundtland Report. And that's when sustainability became sort of hot, right? And the definition here is that sustainable development is development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Sounds nice, right? Sounds like something you could sort of, if you have someone who's into sort of this, where you make little stitches and it says words afterwards. What's that called? Embroidery, right? You could have this embroidered and put over your mantelpiece or something, right? But when we look at it, it actually turns out it's vague. It hides very fundamental values that are there, or it doesn't say anything, right? What's the difference between needs and wants, right? What's the needs of the present compared to the wants of the present? Where do we make that division, right? Because obviously in a hyper-consumerist society, everything can't be needs. So we have to figure out how to distinguish between needs and wants. Brundtland doesn't help us. And in today's consumer society, we are more and more inclined to think if there's something I want, I need it, and I have a right to do it, right? Another thing is, what does development mean? Translated in the report, and as I said before in Western environmental policy, development equals economic growth, right? This could have been spiritual growth, right? This could have been development that ensures that people are enabled to unfold their empathic selves, right? But it hasn't been. And the last thing is, what about all those who aren't humans, right? This is only taking care of humans, present and future generations of humans. But last I looked, we are sharing the planet with a lot of different species. But they are just looked at as resources within Western environmental policy, within the Brundtland report. If you go to the 17 sustainability goals, which are so nice and everybody likes them, it's totally what we call anthropocentric. Back to the anthropos, human. It's human-centered. I know that 13, I think, and 14 goals are take care of land, of life on land, and 14 is in water, I think, right? But when you go and look at the sub-goals and sort of the motivation for this, it's to save humans, right? Everything. Who and what should be taken into ethical consideration? Who do we owe what? Do we owe all humans things, only some humans, or do we also owe animals things? What about plants? What about the biosphere? What does sustainable mean in your context? What do you want to work with? Is social sustainability, environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, what we could call existential, spiritual sustainability? What's the ideal? What's your vision? And what's realistic? And do you think that you should work within this eco-modernization ideology, or would you work for some sort of more human-based green transformation? Or is it sort of the school management that can decide this and then sort of put it out as a decree for all on the school to follow, which will not work, but you probably know that already, right? Or should you ask your local politicians or national politicians to make a policy around this that you can follow? And what if they just make the eco-modernization policy? Are you morally required to rebel against it and do something else? And put your job on the line, perhaps? Yes, very optimistic so far. Okay, so those were all the questions. Now, let me show you here at the end how I get out of bed in the morning from a mental perspective. Because I spent my 25 years doing this, right? So I have to read the reports that come, right? I can't just take the headlines, I have to read them. And I have been in a state of extreme worry to the degree where when I came home from work, I just crawled under a table, put myself in fetal position, and hoped adults would show up and clean up this mess. They didn't. Kids came home from high school, and where's Dad? Oh, he's under the table again. Get out, Dad, you're one of the adults, please go clean up, right? So I had to figure out a way to understand the situation where I could both take in what I know as a researcher is true, the severity of the situation, but still have some kind of motivation, some kind of hope, and some kind of basically joy of life, right? Because if you're only filled with anxiety and dread and you feel hopeless, there's no joy, and where there is no joy, there is no action. There's just giving up. So let me show you how I found that. What I think is the most basic thing we need to do is to move away from this anthropocentric worldview towards a non-anthropocentric, some call it an ecocentric worldview, where we see humans as part of a more than human community. A very special part, because humans have two things that, as far as we know, no other being on the planet has. To some degree, we are rational beings, and to some degree, we can actually do what we want. We are free, we have autonomy. And because we are that, we are rather unique. Because we can actually understand what's going on, and we can choose what to do about it. So that's an amazing ability to have. It gives us great power, but great power doesn't mean you have great opportunities to use the others. It means you have the more responsibility for the others. Skip that one, because we're running out of time. Yes, this is a slide I made. I think we should just contemplate it for a second. Very proud of it, because it's actually a slide showing what can't be shown. What was here before the universe, when there was nothing. There wasn't even empty space. So it's not sort of, oh, it's an empty box, because there was no box. So you have to imagine nothing inside nothing. And that was this. And then something came along. Astrophysicists are very precise on that. They have no idea why, but they can see something happened, so they call it a singularity. It's 13.8 billion years ago, and this singularity began to expand, which we unimaginatively call the Big Bang. And that was the universe that began. And matter has been sort of woof to all sides ever since. And already after about 500 million years, so 13.3 billion years ago, some of all this matter gathered and started making huge sort of formations of stars called galaxies. So this is a galaxy that resembles the one we are in, the Milky Way. It's not the Milky Way because we would have to go outside and take a picture, and we can't, so we took a picture of another one. And today, when we look out in the universe, we can see about 100 billion galaxies, and each galaxy contains around 100 billion stars. I mean, isn't that just... Any math teachers present? No? Okay. Then you can do as me. You can just say, oh, that's a fantasillion times a fantasillion stars out there. Right? And in one of these galaxies that we call the Milky Way, in what one of my hero authors, Douglas Adams, called the non-so-fashionably part of the left spiral arm in that galaxy, a sun began exploding 5 billion years ago, because the sun is basically a small contained explosion, and we call it the sun. And when it had formed, some matter was left, and it sort of it sort of gathered and turned into planets. And you know this one very well. It's called Earth, which shows it's us that gave it the name, right? It's not fish that gave it the name, because 70% of this planet is covered in water, and we call it Earth, which is kind of weird. It's 4.8 billion years old, and 3.8 billion years, something happened on the surface or in the depths of this planet, which biologists can't explain why, but they can say, oh, we can see it there. We went from non-life to life. Life began. And pretty soon, within a couple of 100 million years or four, sort of life began to organize itself through DNA. So suddenly life was able to give inherited traits on to the next generation. And randomness occurred because these genes could mutate just spontaneously or because of background radiation. And a lot of these species also went and found sex. So they mixed their genes, right? And all this set off evolution, where the organism best adapted to the current environment would be the ones who would have the most offspring. So their traits would be given on to next generation. And then they would face different conditions, and others would have more offspring, and it's just called evolution. And that's been going on for more than 3 billion years. All these sort of you can see a species as a life strand, and they just sort of, and then they stop, and a new one comes, and they just whoa between each other. For 3.8 billion years since life started on this planet, in a universe that's 13.8 billion years old, and this is where we are today. Right? And this is not something, this is not surroundings, this is not something nice to look at on Animal Planet while you scroll to find the next baking contest, right? This is your family, right? You are as you are. Our bodies, our minds, our senses are the way they are because we developed together with these, right? We are embedded in an adventure with these beings as close as we are with our own families, right? This is the more than human community towards which we have responsibility. And my hope is that this way of trying to see, hear, taste, and feel the present could help us to act on our knowledge and align our action with our words, because today the distance is much too great. It could help us maintain our sanity while witnessing what is called an ecocide, because we actually every day can be embraced by this community. This community is not in a good shape, but we are part of it. We can find nourishment and joy and comfort just as we can in each other. And we can spend our time trying to make the best conditions for this community as is within our powers. We cannot solve the problem, but if we think that our happiness is sort of, I can only be happy if I know I can win, right? We should all despair, because we're all going to die at some point, right? So no one's winning. But even though we know we're dying, most of us are actually able to take our lives and try to put good stuff into them, even though we know in the end it won't matter. So we could live meaningful lives where quite undeserved we might even sparkle with glimpses of joy along the way. So hope is not towards that everything will be solved, but that we can actually live a purposeful life with occasional joy in our hearts. And I think if we can give that to our children, such an understanding of what is it to be a human among all the other beings here, we have actually done a great service to them, and we have motivated them to begin to act. And that is, as far as I know, all one can ask for. So, based on this, you have about 5 minutes to figure out what is your next step, and then there's a break.